Hi, folks. Ryan Honeyman here from Lift Economy. Many folks have come to us over the last 10 years and asked, how do I get more involved in creating an economy that works for the benefit of all life? They also ask, what skills and experiences do I need to help make this transition? So 3 years ago, we created something called the Next Economy MBA to help address this and similar questions. Lift Economy's Next Economy MBA is an online course that's designed for entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, students, recent graduates, employees, and folks who want to learn more about transformational Next Economy strategies and businesses. Join the growing alumni network of nearly 250 alumni who've gone through this program and learned essential skills and hopefully built lifelong relationships for catalyzing businesses in the emergent and regenerative economy. So we encourage you to check out our course. You can go to lifteconomy.com/MBA. The next course, Cohort 7, starts on September 21st, 2021. So once again, go to www.lifteconomy.com/MBA. And now, on with the show. Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
Welcome, Kelsey. Thanks so much for sharing your time with us this morning. I'd like you to begin by introducing yourself in whichever way you'd like our listeners to hear, and also some of your background of how you got into this work.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm Petuashte to all the listeners. That means good day in Lakota. I am Kelsey Ducheneaux, a fourth-generation rancher on the Cheyenne River Sioux Indian Reservation. I am also the youth programs coordinator for the InterTribal Agriculture Council, as well as the project director of our family's nonprofit project, Help. I am really fortunate and appreciative of the opportunity to visit with you all a little bit today. I really do feel like the realm in which I'm working is kind of just my calling and carrying on the work of the generations that come before me. So I'm excited to visit some more.
Well, that's a great lead into my first question, which is you work with a lot of youth, and I'm so curious around your definition of the next economy and how it's informed by your work with actually the youth that are going to inherit this next economy. What does it look like? And why is it important to you?
Absolutely. So for me, the next economy, the future economy, it appears more stable, sustainable. It's regenerative. So I see a lot more of our younger generations getting involved in the economy as a whole. I'd like to see the revenue of our products in the economy remaining more local within the local economies that those products are produced. I think that is directly correlated to an improved health of the product and of the producer, as well as, our partnerships beginning to be a little more restructured in a manner that allow our trade to improve the communities and the lifestyle for both the consumers and the entrepreneurs.
Are there any traditions or guidelines that inform your view of economy that you'd like to share?
Well, some of my most historical teachings, I guess, are learnings, since I'm the one on the receiving end of that knowledge, would be our historical trade routes as indigenous peoples on this continent. We had the salmon fish way out here in the Great Plains, and there was buffalo hides way over in Spokane where the salmon fish came from. So I think what we have to realize is that the economy on this continent way predated that of the dollar bill arriving here. We had a trade. We had trade routes, and we had economies that were very vibrant and in many ways more sustainable and more harmonious with the landscape upon which they existed. And for me, as I move forward in trying to promote the development of local economies throughout Indian country in my career, I really like to tie back to some of just the philosophies surrounding that concept of those trade routes and figure out how can I utilize my role as youth programs coordinator for a national organization to connect some of the dots that are just left existing around the country and make sure that the partnerships and the networking that needs to take place across the nation in order to ensure a profitable and sustainable economy exists. How do I put those dots together, and how do I make things happen within my role and my job to promote the betterment?
Are there some stories of tribal youth that are building the next economy, maybe elements that help you along moving forward towards that vision that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's several that come to mind. One of them is a young man from the Hupa Nation of California, and he really witnessed the disparity that we face in the health of our economy and our food systems of Indian country when the local grocery store was condemned for, I believe it was a rat infestation. And it put his entire community without access to food at all. And he realized that, many, many years ago, there was a vibrant culture of people that existed here, and there was no grocery stores. And how did we still maintain our health and prosper? And so what he has worked on over the course of the past few years and really shared with our youth programming and utilized the skills which he developed through our youth programming in building is ROOTS, which stands for Restoring Our Own Traditional Sustainability. And he has developed youth leadership camps, which immerse the youngest generation of the community back into the landscape and teach them the skills of hunting and fishing and collecting the berries and preserving all of these foods to sustain them throughout all seasons of the year. And, for that community, not only is it building the economy, but it's helping people to survive without the basic need of food and calories for intake. They would be facing starvation. And in the 21st century, I'd like to think we've come far enough that shouldn't have to be a concern anymore. So I'm really proud of this young man for the work that he's been doing. And he's a good example of some of the work that we've been able to support and be a part of across the country.
And just for our listeners who might not be as familiar with the InterTribal Agriculture Council, can you share the mission of the youth program and what you're striving to accomplish with the support that you do provide?
Absolutely. So the mission for the InterTribal Agriculture Council as a whole is to provide a unified effort to promote change in Indian agriculture for the benefit of Indian people. And we have always had a strong emphasis on youth leadership, our youth involvement in all of our programming, really since our establishment. But in the past 7 or 8 years, we've really done a lot of work to try to expand our youth programming and opportunities available directly to the youngest generation. We now have a youth-led and youth-taught movement, which has been self-identified by our youngest generation as the Native Youth Food Sovereignty Alliance. And they have been doing an absolutely phenomenal job of building what they feel is going to be a more sustainable, more efficient structure of organization for them as the future leaders of Indian agriculture. And they've really been kind of, in a manner, directing how I should be doing my job, showing me where they feel it's important. I put a little extra emphasis and connecting me with communities that really, really need some opportunities for their youth. They've been at the forefront of really all that the IAC has done in the past couple of years, excuse me, whether that's, trying to be involved or spreading the good word by sharing a Facebook post. They've become a staple and really uplifted a lot of our programming as a whole organization.
That strikes me as a very different approach than some of the patterns I've inherited in working in California and through our institutions. And curious if there were other stories that you wanted to share, or even comments on how youth at the forefront and as the leaders, how that shifts the types of projects that emerge.
Yeah. So what I'm learning is that youth leadership it's truly a way of life rather than any certain activity. And if we can equip our young people with life skills that can apply to any situation, food and agriculture is the life source. I mean, water, everybody needs water to sustain life. We need calories to consume, we need clothes to wear, and we need buildings to exist in. And if we can just equip youth with a little bit of knowledge, enough knowledge to make them deadly in terms of what Indian agriculture is and the role that Indian agriculture could play in helping to feed and clothe and, house the world, then we also share with them a life skill of, reaching out and networking and doing what you can to inspire others to do good and highlighting the good that does exist within the communities and, reconciling some of the historical trauma that's taken place within their communities, then we can really see just a wave of improvement across the community. And a lot of times that community's improvement leaks to the surrounding communities. And before you know it, you have a regional movement of, I just returned home from the Northwest Youth Summit where we had 9 youth spend 4 days up in the Yakima Mountains. And boy, did we have so much fun just learning within the landscape, but also preparing for the return home and knowing that we have a long, trying road ahead of continuing to make sure that more and more youth have a chance to have those opportunities and have those opportunities be meaningful for them in a way that they can try to create a change that will last for multiple generations.
I love that. It's so aligned with Lift's vision too of really focusing on the social entrepreneurs that are creating human goods and services, essential human needs through their entrepreneurship. And a question that's coming up for me right now is, what is the spirit of entrepreneurship or interest in food systems that's emerging in terms of patterns from the youth that you work with? Is there a strong interest in going back to the land and finding ways to make economically viable ways to meet human needs through food and agriculture?
Yeah, so one of the coolest components to this movement of youth kind of immersing themselves in Indian food and ag is they see beyond the bottom line of money. And they also focus on the impact that it has on the environment. When we have workshops on, marketing our foods or packaging our foods, I mean, they focus on, well, which form of packaging or printed label is going to have less of an impact on the environment. It's not which one can we get for the cheapest. I think that there's a change on the horizon, and we're going to continue to drive towards an environment of an economy that doesn't solely focus on how you can make the most profit, but rather remembers that how do we make a sustainable business and a sustainable food system that not only supports or improves the health of those consuming, but improves the health of those producing and the health of the ecosystem surrounding, and most of the time being at the root cause of the product existing in the first place.
Oh, that's so heartening to hear.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have thoughts on how we can expand that consciousness to other members of our society.
Every youth event that we hold, it seems like out of our, beyond our control, we order catering from an event, or we go to a certain restaurant that may have styrofoam cups or something just that is known now, or starting to be known as a taboo. You don't want to use those. They're so bad for Mother Earth. And the youth, once they're aware, I think education is key here. Once we've been able to educate alongside of the policies that are getting implemented, the importance of preserving our natural resources and using more eco-friendly products, I think we're going to start to see that really expand as a staple of our generation. I know that there's a lot of cities that are implementing the policy of no more plastic straws. And I think that is absolutely wonderful. I think it's wonderful because I understand what plastic straws do to the environment. But for somebody who is not aware or not connected or has never seen the ocean and doesn't realize that all of those plastic straws end up somewhere unable to break down and sometimes influencing the lives of animals or people that you'll never actually physically see, I would probably be frustrated that I would have to mess up my lipstick every time I ordered a drink or a beverage at a restaurant. So I think we really have to remember that policy can be most effective when there is some education alongside of it. And if you can get young people who are educating others, it really spreads like wildfire, the desire to do your part in the cause.
I actually just met the founder of a company that's trying to address the straw issue. It's a company called Lollyware that's making straws out of seaweed.
Oh, wow.
Down in the ocean. I'm trying to get her on the podcast, but yeah, stay tuned for more of that. Yeah, I'm wondering too, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about growing up and being a multi-generational ranching family and maybe talk a little bit about how that might inform your work too, or maybe I don't know if it does, but I imagine being out on the land and understanding that probably has a lot to do with that consciousness that you've developed. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I consider myself incredibly fortunate for the forethought that my parents and grandparents and great-grandparents had in establishing a life for their grandchild and great-grandchild that they may never meet, in which I have the ability to do whatever it is I would like. And I have the belief in myself that I can do whatever it is I set my mind to with a little bit of work and a stroke of good networking ability. So with that being said, I found myself ranching alongside of my dad and my uncles. My grandparents have since entered into the spirit world and they're no longer in the partnership anymore. But every day when I wake up, I think, how can I continue to preserve and improve upon the resources that we have access to so that, the great grandchild or great great grandchild that I never get to meet has the opportunity to enjoy the meadowlark singing in the morning or the beautiful sunsets off to the west. And, in addition to that, I have been fortunate in my employment with the InterTribal Agriculture Council to supplement some of the work that I want to do on the land. It's conservation can sometimes be expensive. Land stewardship is a 24/7 type of job. And I see on my ranch, as well as other ranches around the country, that we're most often doing what we know to do or what we think is right. And, again, with the educational component, we have to have access to the knowledge of the improvements that are made. And we have to be able to trust in the knowledge of that we're presented in a manner that we can say, what if grandpa wasn't right? What if moldboard plowing isn't the best way to prepare my field for the harvest this fall? And we really have to try to express that empathy as we address the environmental concerns that are surrounding agriculture as a whole, in my opinion, because it's not just a career path. It's not just a job. It's a way of life for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for bringing in the economic challenges of financing the investment and regeneration of the land, for bringing in the social dynamics of, how do we repair, certainly relationships. There's a murkiness that happens when land is involved and land use and values. And it's I'm so grateful and appreciative of how you've straddled both, doing the work on the ground and being active in the conservation and restoration, and then also holding another off-farm job and how they are mutually supportive.
Well, thank you for that. It's definitely what I've noticed. Another thing I wanted to add that I forgot is, as tribal producers, our understanding of the ecosystem is not necessarily younger, but there was an entire generation where we decided to hide our knowledge because it saved the knowledge and it preserved our ability to be connected. And that was an educational breakdown for us. And so we see a lot of tribal producers that are attaching onto the practices of the local landscape, or, the practices that their grandpa stumbled upon. But what my ability in this job with the IAC, and as a cattle rancher who really truly believes in those historical trade routes and our historical land stewardship management styles, what I've been able to do is try to challenge some of those questions. And I'm fortunate in having an older generation in the ranching operation that's willing to challenge them with me. And it's, one thing we were just talking about is the concept of beavers on the landscape. Now, when somebody sees a beaver, they think of, to trap or to shoot it because it's bad for the ecosystem. But really, I think that teaching came from the settlement of the United States and fur trading. It wasn't necessarily that they were bad for the ecosystem, but they had a dollar value, and that was a part of the economy. So we would trap or kill or whatever we needed to trade their fur. And now we're seeing at home no beaver activity. But the reality is, if we had those beavers there, they would be improving the landscape. They would be building the dams that would bring back the trees, that would improve the habitat for the wildlife and for the fish. But we forgot about the teaching of the beaver before the fur trading, because that was the generation that would remember that teaching decided to keep the stories quiet because they wanted to, try to save them. And they did everything that they could to save them in the way that they thought was best. And now we just have to figure out how to try to resprout some of those seeds that our ancestors tried to preserve for us and make them grow again.
Thank you so much for bringing up that gap in knowledge, and that concept of how knowledge was quieted for a generation or many generations. And I know I'm very inspired by the work of Lila June and in her poetry and song, how she talks about how that's true for both native and non-native folk. And I'm wondering if we could speak a little bit, if you have thoughts around, and even going back to the work with youth, maybe guide us, give for those of us that aren't indigenous to this continent, what can non-native settlers do to support the youth that you work with, help these ideas spread, and really be accomplices in this work rather than bystanders?
Yeah, so I think I was also fortunate in my upbringing to be taught that being Lakota is not about blood quantum. It's about how you interact with the resources around you and how you interact with the people around you, and the forethought that you put into knowing your actions in your life will influence the next 7 generations. And really, I think the majority of the pain or anger that comes along with misunderstood interpretations or interactions with Native and non-Native individuals is historical trauma under the surface. It's been proven that the trauma experienced up to 7 generations back can influence your DNA. And we have to, as native and non-native alike, realize the fact that none of us were around 7 generations ago when this, tragedy on the landscape was existing. And we have to let go of that preconceived notion of they just don't understand or they just don't get it. And at the same time, we have to empathize with the other side of the spectrum. And, I am a descendant of the Lakota Nation, but I also have German ancestry and Irish ancestry. And I'm just as proud of every single component of my ancestry as I am of being Lakota. But the thoughts and the philosophies behind existing in harmony with the landscape that my Lakota teachings have showed me is what resonates with me most directly as how I hope to live my life. And so how for non-Native people to continue to improve the interactions that they have with Native organizations or support the work of what they're doing is, maybe take a step back and try to understand the underlying philosophies or concepts that exist rather than being hung up on the concept that they have a Native American blood quantum or, the government has required them to have a Native American enrollment number.
Mm-hmm. I love that idea of reflecting back, taking a step back. What were the words you used? Could you elaborate? Maybe there's a story or an instance that demonstrates that you could think of, or even just more questions that are emerging for you around that.
Give me just a second.
Sure.
So I've come into contact with so many people, really in my career that are non-Native, but they have found a calling in trying to support the healing of what has taken place over the past several generations. And while they're not in the forefront of receiving awards for the organization's work, they are, as a Native American director, they are right there behind that individual, doing everything that they can to support the mission's work of the organization. And they are carrying on their efforts in that Indigenous way, in a way that realizes it's not about being the reason for the credit. It's about that credit working for the 7th generation down the line. And without calling out some of them point blank on the podcast, I do just want to say that there are some really, really outstanding non-Native people that, back in the day, we probably would have hunked into our communities. We would have accepted and adopted them into our communities because of their mindset and their forethought and their desire to take less than they receive, to take less than they give, and to really help others in any way that they can.
That's a really interesting principle to think on, the principle of reciprocity and taking less than you give as a way to catalyze a regenerative cycle on the planet. I think of the metaphor of the seed. It's like the seed gives so many more seeds ultimately over the course of its life.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm curious, what else is present for you right now? What are you working on right now that is exciting to you? Take us into the work.
Yeah, absolutely. What's most exciting for me right now is getting to watch this, we call it internally our youth leadership pipeline, watching it really grow and watching the irrigation that comes off of that pipeline water hundreds and hundreds of fields in a way that is promoting some really, really great things in communities across the country. The Native Youth Food Sovereignty Alliance is really a dream come true to see formalized, and their thought and their interactions as a body, a governing body, if you will, of our youth programming is just beyond their time. I mean, we have 18, 19, 20, and 21-year-olds serving on this NIFSA board, and they are thinking of things in terms of, generations from now when this board is in place. And they're figuring out, they don't want as a organization to just serve the youth. How do they implement their policies in a manner that will also uplift their elders? And how do they think about, the tiny tots, the toddlers? What about their parents? Where do they fit into this circle? And they're really working to bring back our families, our family structure. And in, Native teaching, your family is not only all humans, but your relations extend to the inanimate objects and to the animals and to the winged and the four-legged. And so to have them thinking in that mindset of how can we care for everybody in this picture? How do we serve as a youth body that is promoting everyone, all ages, all forms? And what does that look like moving forward? It really is inspiring work to get to kind of step back and watch unfold. And I feel like I am watching the change that 7 generations from now, people will be dreaming about understanding how it possibly could have taken shape.
I love that. And I'm curious if there are any particular, earlier you were telling us about the man involved in the root program and on the Hoopa tribal lands. And I'm curious if there are any other stories that you feel called to share.
Yeah, absolutely. One young lady came into our programming, I believe when she was 15 going on 16 years old. She took a liking to the concept of doing a food sovereignty inventory within her community, an assessment to figure out how close her community members were to understanding the importance of being able to feed themselves. And really, she has served as a staple in inspiring a food sovereignty assessment for many communities across Indian country, because not only did she go home, convince her tribe to apply for the grant that should hire her to do this work, but she utilized her network, which she gained through our annual youth leadership event, which we have at the University of Arkansas School of Law every summer, to challenge her fellow peers to do the same thing in their communities. And it makes me so happy anytime I get a Facebook notification and it's one of our outstanding youth leaders in that wonderful pipeline that I talked about a little bit ago, sharing their new online Google form survey, asking their community members what they think food sovereignty means and how they define it. And I really do feel like that within our network was initiated by a young lady from the Warm Springs tribe of Oregon. Another really great story that I love to share is a young man who is from the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. He's just done some phenomenal things at such an early age with his ranching operation, and really in so many times within his life has been flipped upside down with the educational change that he's had to make to best fit his career path, or even the career change that he initially made to dive into ag as a career. And he's handled it with such poise and in such a calm manner that he's been able to help others go through similar experiences as to what he's experiencing, all at the young age of 20 years old right now. So there's a lot of strength and foresight and a lot of inspiration that exists within our youngest generation of Indian ag leadership.
And how can our listeners support specifically your work with the InterTribal Agriculture Council and the Youth Leadership Program?
Absolutely. We have a presence on Facebook and Instagram and our website. You can find us at indianaglink.com. You can also, on Facebook, we are IAC Indian Ag Youth, as well as we have an InterTribal Agriculture Council Facebook page as well. We have a mailing list, which you can sign up for on our website. And every year we convene for an annual symposium, the first full week of December, which you can find more information about on our website. And the youth program is a very mobile programming under the IAC's umbrella of work. We actually do youth leadership development events for Native youth surrounding the concepts and the ideas and the efforts of Indian food and agriculture at the local, regional, and national levels. So we have 2 national events and then also regional events in each of the 12 regions that we have across the country. And we've had a lot of interest in our youth that participate at the regional and national events, relying on some of our mentorship or guidance in developing local events that they can coordinate. And, we love to see that transition of leadership from one organization to an individual or from one mind to the next. So we're always here to help. If you have any way, if you ever would like to get in touch with me, you can reach me at Kelsey, Kelsey, at indianaglink.com, or you'd be able to find my phone number on our website.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Before we close, are there any other thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners? I know this has been really, really wonderful and heartening for me, and just curious if there's any other last thoughts you'd like to share.
No, I really enjoy the opportunity to be able to highlight some of the great work that's going on across Indian agriculture. I'm most definitely really, really passionate about the youth efforts on our front. I suppose parting words that I would share is, there's a saying that says, opportunity will come knocking, but that's only if there's a door built. And for a lot of our youth across Indian country, there's not even a door frame in place to hang a door. So it is our responsibility as the current generation of society to work on building these doors for our young people and figure out how can we set them up for success in the future, and empathize with where they're at in, not having the opportunities that we kind of expect them to have, or being exposed to opportunities that don't really fit where they're at in their life. Ask the youth, what tools do you need to be successful? Don't give them a box of tools and expect that to be the one-stop shop answer for making them successful. Our youth, once they are empowered enough to share, will tell us really what they're experiencing and what they need to see, or what they could benefit from. And the more we rely on them to help us in, venturing out into the future of tomorrow, the quicker we'll be able to showcase to them that they have the ability to lead, and they're going to do some great things in their life, and hopefully, not hopefully, for sure, what that will produce is communities that are really vibrant and engaged and enthusiastic about a more prosperous tomorrow.
Well, Kelsey, thank you very much for showing up this morning, for sharing these stories and your wisdom. And I definitely look forward to hearing feedback from our listeners about this and having them get engaged and stay connected to your work. So thank you so much.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.